Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to everybody. Happy New Year. Hope that your holidays were pleasant and that you are ready to jump in and get your nonprofit going or your for-profit, depending what you have. We're very fortunate today that we have with us David Holmes, who's the education manager for Candid. And we will talk a little bit about where to go to find grant opportunities as we move forward. But one of the major opportunities is Candid. And as I said, David is the educational manager for Candid. So I'm going to turn it over to him, and he's going to do a little demo of the Candid database and give you an idea of what kind of information you'll be able to find there. So David, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Anita. And hi, everybody. My name is Dave Holmes. I am the Educational Programming Manager for Candid. And if you don't know what Candid is, I'll share my screen and I'll show you what Candid is. Candid is a national nonprofit, and it started 7 years ago as Candid, but before that, it was known as Foundation Center and also GuideStar. And together, Foundation Center and GuideStar provide information on nonprofits and funding for nonprofits throughout the United States. And so, if you are interested in learning more about Candid, I encourage you to go to our website, candid.org. I'm very grateful to Anita and SCORE for letting me have this little 5 minutes at the very beginning just to talk about us, because one of the main things we do at Candid is provide information on grant seeking and grant writing for people that want to learn more about it. And so I want to share just a couple of tools that we have, and I'll tell you where you can get access to them as well. One thing I should say about Candid is that we are really set up to provide as much free information as we can. So if you go to candid.org, you'll be able to look up your own nonprofit, for example, and update the information on it so that you can have a Candid profile, which is used by funders to do research on you. Another section on candid.org that's particularly useful is our resources section. And the resources section has a section called Candid Learning. And I'm just bringing up the Candid Learning site because there's so many free trainings there on that are available recorded and self-paced and also as live webinars on proposal writing and putting budgets together and fundraising planning and working with your board and all the different things that are related to running a nonprofit. I encourage you to look at the Candid Learning section. Also, it will tell you where there are partners with Candid near you. There is a little section in the resources called Candid Near You from candid.org. You can go to this, and it will tell you where there is a resource location. So you can put in your zip code, and it will tell you where you can get free access to Candid's materials at usually at public libraries near you. The reason why you would want to do that is that one of our main tools is something that is not free from home, but that you can use for free at all of these places near you, putting in your zip code. They're all across the country and across Mexico as well. And this tool is called Foundation Directory. And the reason why you would use it is if you are going to be learning about grants and grant writing and doing grant seeking, you should know that you can use Foundation Directory to find grant opportunities. And you can use it for free at all of those places where you can find Candid near you. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like. If, say, for example, you were creating a youth organization, and that's you're starting a youth nonprofit, and you want to find funders who are giving for youth or youth development. You can put in the term, you can put in where you're located. So I'll put in Paterson, New Jersey, just as an example, because I did see someone was from Paterson here. And you can do a search to see who has given grants, private grants from foundations, corporations, or charities that give money away, who has given grants for youth development in Paterson, New Jersey since 2003. And there are lists of those grant makers organized by the ones that have given the most grants. And any one of them is one that you can click on and read more about. and you can find out information about how to apply to them, see who they've given grants to, look at their application information, look at their contact information, their website. And if you want to email this information to yourself, you can do that too by clicking on the little email a PDF at the top of the screen. But if you're not sure, I'm doing this really quickly and you want to use this tool, which is called Foundation Directory, you know that you can go to a library near you. Any of these locations we have um, over 2,000 now throughout the United States and Mexico. You can put in your zip code. There was somebody from Pittsburgh too, so I'll put in a Pittsburgh zip code, and you can see the Squirrel Hill Library. All the branches of the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh are partners of ours. So I encourage you to get free access to Candid, to go in and get some expert assistance from the librarians on searching it, and to also visit our candid.org site, update your nonprofit information, and go to our Candid Learning site to find out about different trainings we offer on all sorts of different topics. And I'm going to turn this, let's see if there's any questions before I go away. This is, I think, being recorded and the slides will be sent to you. I don't have any slides, but my email address, just to repeat it, it is in the chat, is
Yeah,
david.holmes@candid.org. And I'll stop sharing and turn this back over to you,
yeah.
Anita.
I don't actually see any questions there. Well, I'm looking in the Q&A,
Yeah,
which
I think
asks if
that,
this will be recorded. Is it yes in your email address? So I think we're good.
well, I appreciate the opportunity to
Yeah,
talk to all of you, and you're in good hands with Anita. And so I'm
great.
going to leave and turn
Thank you
this
so
over to
much,
you.
David.
Thank you.
Greatly
Take care, everybody.
appreciated.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Okay, so I'm assuming you're here because you are interested in grants. And so we're going to talk about grants. Um, Although Candid really only has nonprofit grants, we're going to talk a little bit about for-profit grants as well. So um, don't feel that you're being left out. So, okay, so we're talking about grant writing basics. And I hope at the end of the session, you will know where you can go to find opportunities, how to determine your eligibility. Let me see, okay. Understand how to approach writing a grant, and then what should you include in your grant application? And for some reason, my video, okay, it didn't seem to want to stop. Um, so before you apply for a grant, you really have to be prepared. And that means having your business plan available. And essential part of that is your financial plan, because in order to apply, you have to know what you want money for. That's you can't ask for money if you don't know what it's for. So, and also you want to apply for funds that are going to support your strategic and your business plan. So be very clear about your mission, your vision, what you're trying to accomplish with your organization. One of the most important things, again, is the financials. Do you have a financial system where you are going to be able to track all of your finances so that you can report back specifically how you use those funds? And that's no small thing, because you do have to be able to track all the expenses related to the grant. They have to be kept separate from any other funds that you have. So if you have a few different grants, you have to keep each one of those separate, track all the expenses and the revenue associated with it. So you need a good financial system. If you don't, you can consider using a fiscal agent. And that's generally a well-established 501c3 tax exempt organization that has those financial systems and agrees to handle and manage your grant funds for you. Um, so again, as you're working with your mentor, you can talk about those things and look for potential uh, organizations that might work for you as a fiscal agent. What do they want to know? Again, what is your track record? So if you're just starting up, it's going to be a real challenge to get a grant unless there's specific requests for a startup. And there are some of those. So if you are starting up, don't get discouraged. There are places that you can go to look for startup funds, but they are challenging. And as with every other grant, they're very competitive. So also, what have you accomplished? If you're in business, how long have you been in business? What have you accomplished during that period of time? So that would be your key performance measures. If you have any kind of an organization, you have to be measuring your key performance measures because you need to be able to show you're successful. It's almost impossible to say to somebody, well, we're successful when we don't have any way to show that. Like, for instance, in SCORE, if people ask us, how can we tell you're successful? We're able to say to them, we have mentored 4,000 clients this year. We've produced maybe 150 webinars. Um, and they say, well, that's good. But how many businesses have you started? And then we can say, well, we have supported the starting of this number of businesses. And I'll show you some of our measures as we go forward. Then, of course, the most important thing is how are you going to use the money? And for a lot of nonprofits who are just starting, it's a challenge to figure out exactly how you are going to use that money. So you want to be prepared. Sit down with your board and talk about what are our business goals for the upcoming year? How much money do we need to support those business goals? And then go out and look for grants. So where do you find grant opportunities? So sometimes your board members are involved with other organizations who might give grants or know who gives grants. You can just simply do a Google or AI search. And sometimes that comes up with some interesting ideas. You probably want to look at local organizations and foundations. Most of our clients, and so I'm going to use a general uh, assessment, is that most of you are fairly small. So you probably want to look at local organizations and foundations versus national ones because you're not looking for huge amounts of money. So that's where Candid comes into play. Candid is by far the easiest and best way to find organizations that will fund your nonprofit. If, as David describes his database, you can go there and find out who supports the kind of organization that you are, um, how much money they've been giving to them, what the timing is, how do you go about making an application and so forth. So it's a wonderful resource. Again, as David pointed out, if you go directly to their website, you have to buy a subscription, which can cost you a few $100s a month. But if you locate a library that has access, it's generally free. But you do have to go there and use the database in the library. But again, the reference librarian will probably sit with you and show you how to use it. So it's all good. Now, if you're looking for government grants, you want to go to grants.gov. There are 26 different agencies that post their requests on that site. There will be some others, and we'll talk about those that you might want to use depending on what your nonprofit is trying to do. This link is, again, both for nonprofit and for-profit. It says grants for women, but that website also has grants specifically for minorities and also some for both men and women. So they list generally current opportunities, which means a lot of the organizations that do private grants and will also fund for-profits may not always have funds available, but on this site, it's always current. So it's worth looking at maybe once a month to see what's up there. If you're in Ohio, there are some links to the state website. If you're not in Ohio, do go to your state website under business and look for business resources. Every state has something available. Sometimes they're just block grants, but other times they have specific pots of money available, maybe on a short-term basis. Again, if you check the website every month or so, you might find resources that are available specifically for your type of organization. So when you look at grants, you really have to find out, am I eligible? So part of it is, am I eligible for the grant? So the type of grant. For instance, if you're an arts organization, you probably don't want to apply for something that's a health-based grant application. So you want to find something that really fits. If you're going through grants.gov, you have to obtain a UEI first. But now, it used to be a little more complicated. Now you can just request one without having to go through a complete registration. So other private foundations generally have some eligibility in the announcement. In other words, they might tell you what kind of organization or what industry, whatever. Some private foundations require that you know somebody who works for that foundation. So you have to look and identify specifically foundations that have the detailed information. And again, that's where Candid is very helpful. Legal eligibility relative to funding opportunities is mostly related to, are you a 501c3 or not? Many organizations will, or granting organizations will tell you how big. They might say, especially if you're talking about the nonprofits, it can be a school, it can be a hospital, it can be a for-profit. Some of the federal grants do have for-profit, allow for-profit applications. I recall one in particular, when I was looking for childcare, there was a request for proposals for childcare centers that included for-profit organizations, nonprofits that were not 501c3s, schools, so a whole list of eligible organizations. And certainly under grants.gov, they're much more specific generally than some of the private grants. So you do have to be careful to make sure that you are eligible for it. Again, it's hard to get money for startups. Again, if you look under the link that says for women, you will find organizations that will give you small grants for starting up. And again, if you're starting and you need a few $1,000s, you might want to apply to 3 or 4 or 5 or how many to get the amount of money you need. But it's always good to have more than one source. So if you have one organization that gives you $10,000 and they decide they're going to stop giving you money, then you've lost the entire amount going forward. Whereas if you have 5 different grants giving you $2,000 each, and one of them discontinues, you're not in a desperate situation. So sometimes it's better to have more grants, small volume, than to have one large, big one. So if you don't meet the eligibility requirements that are stated, don't waste your time applying. It just isn't worth it. They will not even review your application. One thing you should always do specifically, and especially for private foundations, contact the program director. Tell them about your organization. Say, is this the type of organization that you would be interested in supporting? And that would be a wonderful way to establish a relationship and also understand whether you're really going to fit or not and whether it's worthwhile putting in an application. So in summary, you want to have a solid business plan, an excellent financial plan. You'd like to have a track record, and you want to apply only for grants that fit your strategy. So we'll talk about all of the things that you need to include in an application. And I always recommend that before you sit down and put in the application, make sure that you have all of the pieces and parts that you need, such as your board list, your IRS determination letter, and all of those types of things that support what you are as an organization. So private foundations give you grants if your mission is consistent with their funding initiatives. And they will, and I'll show you an example, they will list what their funding initiatives are. On the other hand, if you don't fit one of their funding initiatives, they might provide a charitable donation if you have a one-time small project that you're not going on a long term. You can ask for just a charitable donation. Okay, so the type of objectives you'll find if you go to the website and look under the foundation. Don't go to, say, for Key Bank. You don't want to go just to Key Bank. You want to go to the Key Bank Foundation. And they will outline what their objectives are. And many of them are interested in supporting the community. Low income demographics, they want to support economic development, they want to support educational opportunities. So if you look at those, you want to make sure that you will fit at least one of those objectives. So as a SCORE fundraiser, I might go to there and say, we're providing mentoring and education to low income. We're specifically focusing on low income clients to help them develop businesses that support economic development. And we also provide education so that they can become better business owners. So we could write a grant that kind of fits in all those um, objectives. So again, they might say, as a corporate neighbor, our focus is on neighborhoods, education, workforce, with an emphasis on racial, economic, and environmental equity. So again, most of the private foundations that belong, say, one of the banks or one of the major companies in your area, they will usually fund nonprofits that have a 501c3 because they want the tax deduction, and many large organizations actually are required to set aside approximately 10% of their profit to fund and support their communities. So if you have in your city a business of any size, go and see if they have a foundation. So what do you put in your application? Let me just, first of all, your mission statement. That tells very clearly who you are, who you're servicing, and what you're giving, what the benefits are being derived by the clients that you're serving. So you need a background summary. Why did you start your organization? Again, what has been your experience so far? And what are your major business goals? Your statement of need is basically your value proposition. Again, what are you offering? Um, so when you write an application, of course, they want the title of your project. How much money are you asking for? And what are you going to do with the money? Is it for operations? Is it for a program? Or is it for capital expenditures? So a lot of organizations will support programs, but do not want to support operations or capital. On the other hand, there are organizations that will support capital or who will support operations. So it depends on what type of funding you're looking for as to what organization you want to apply to. So you have to have a meeting of the minds, so to speak, between you and the organization that is funding. So you want to do a description of your project, and I will show you an example. And what are the start and end dates? So when you look at the granting organization, when does their funding cycle start? When can you expect the money? And for how many periods are they willing to support? Some organizations will say they'll support you for a year, but if you're doing well and they're happy with your progress, they might continue to 2 or 3 years. The one issue, of course, is they're going to say when the grant finishes, so we're going to support you for 2 years. At the end of that 2-year period, we expect you to have developed a revenue stream to replace that grant. So that means either you continue to write grants or you develop your donor base. And last month we did a webinar on funding your nonprofit. And in that, it's pretty clear that your best approach, if you're small, is to develop a donor base, because then you can depend on those donors continuing to support you. And it's not, will support you for 6 months or a year. You want to get people who will give you an ongoing support. Or the other alternative, if you can do that, if you're providing a service, by all means, charge for the service. Even if you have a service where you are providing to lower income people, you can always do a sliding scale. If you have one that you can bill insurances for, that's even better, of course. So they want to know, again, where are you going to provide the services? How many people are you going to serve? And that's a very important thing, because a lot of times they will look and see, well, they're only going to support 15 people in a year. That's, let's look for a grant that, an application that maybe will serve a few hundred people. And what is the impact of your program? What does it do? What's the outcome that's expected? And again, that's really important. How impactful is your program going to be? This is where it's important to have key performance measures. You want to be able to show our program will result in these outcomes. So again, they want budget detail, the use of the funds, and they also want to know how many other organizations are you applying to for your project. So here's where your business plan is very helpful, because you can cut and paste from your business plan. They want to know the geographic area served. Now, for instance, in Cleveland, the Cleveland Foundation will support grants in Cuyahoga and Lake County only, whereas our SCORE chapter provides service to 7 different counties. So we have to focus fundraising on different counties in order to support all of our clients. They want to know the ethnicity, gender, and if you're serving individuals with disabilities, homelessness, etc. And those things, while they're maybe not the crux of your organization, they do impact on the decision making. They also want to know, what is the health status of your organization? So do you have staff that can do the work? How are your operations? Are you effective in what you're doing? Now, even though it's not PC at these times, some of the foundations will still ask if you have a mission statement regarding DEI, or do you have a plan to implement a strategy? Some of them also asked about, do you have an environmental sustainability strategy? What are you doing to positively impact on climate change? They do want a list of your board and your staff members, a copy of your determination letter, your 990, which is the yearly report that you make to the IRS, and your most recent audited financials. So these are increasingly being required because there's so much competition for grants that they're trying to maybe segregate a little bit by the quality and the quantity of your organization. So here are some tools that you might use for writing grants. One's called Open Grant, Grantable, a Grant Assistant. If you see some of this tool, for instance, will actually analyze the request for proposals and draft something um, that is tailored specifically to the funder requirements. Um, you have to be kind of careful about using something as extreme as that because there are organizations, for example, the National Health Institute now screens grant applications to see if they've been using AI. And if they are, they might reject them. So use AI, but use it effectively to assist you in certain areas, but don't just try to use it to write a grant for you. There's some general purpose tools you can use if you've experience with Chat, GPT, and Gemini, and these others. Using AI tools, I think, are helpful in where you're writing a narrative. For instance, if you're writing background and you want it maybe to be a bit more appealing, you could put it into an AI tool and ask it to uh, maybe use a certain reading level, a certain tone, um, or just correct your stammer, your grammar and spelling, for that matter. But do take advantage of these tools where you can. So I'm just going to give you an example here, a title, expansion of Empower Her facility. We're going to ask for $150,000, only $10,000 for operations, 40 for programming, but 100,000 for capital. So, and the start and end date would be a 2-year period from January 1 to December 2028. So here's the project description that I'm not going to read it all. It's pretty wordy, but what I want to show you is what I have done is say, empower her services directly align with your foundation's priorities in education and workforce development for underserved youth by equipping participants with social, academic, and vocational skills needed for a successful transition to adulthood. So this is an organization that supports at-risk girls, 13 to 18. It's both a residential place, but it also has residential areas and promotes personal growth. They have emotional counseling. So, but what I want to do is make it clear to whoever's reviewing the grant that what we're doing specifically aligns with their priorities. And it says we stand out by offering a unique trauma-informed care model. We integrate all these different services. We collaborate with local schools, mental health professionals, and community organizations. And this is, again, if you're collaborating with other organizations, it's wonderful if you can get a letter from those organizations. For instance, for this project, we would go to the local schools that we deal with and say, would you give us a letter saying that you support this organization and that you are working with us to support these young people? And believe it or not, the grant reviewers do read those and they do help to support your application. So if you are collaborating, by all means, see if you can get a letter of support. So we're saying we're requesting funds to expand our physical facilities and programs. We're going to increase the number of young women that we're able to support. So that's where we're going with it. We're saying we're currently supporting 100 girls. We have a staff of 28, and we are going to put those in our budget justification. So, and with the funds, we're saying what we're going to use the funds for. We're going to increase our capacity to serve more young women. And that means that we're actually using, as we said, $100,000 to build additional facility, plus the program and operations. And here's how we measure our success. How many of our residents have a high school diploma when they graduate? How many of them graduate from our life skills program? Again, this will give them entry-level jobs. How long does it take them to find their first jobs? And then how many go on to higher education? And then I plugged this into an AI tool. And this is the AI rewrite. It's basically saying the same thing, but it's emphasizing it in a slightly different way. Educational attainment, workforce readiness, job placement, and continuing education. So it's just taking what I originally wrote and emphasizing the outcome. So hopefully it makes it more appealing to the grant reviewer. So budgets are, again, probably one of the most important things. And I will say about the budget, many of the granting organizations will say, we have set aside X number of dollars, or we will support organizations in the range of $25,000 to $100,000, or something that gives you an idea of what their range is. But you should not take the approach that the application with the lowest budget is more likely to be successful. What's important is to have a budget that is fit for the project that you're applying for. So don't stint on what you're asking for. Ask for exactly what you need to accomplish your program. And they will ask for the entire organization budget and then that particular program budget within your entire organization. So you may have an organization that does support of, say, these kids, say, but then maybe within that, I want to develop a recreational program. So I would give them the entire organization budget, but also give them the separate budget for that program that I'm asking for funding for. And again, oftentimes they want to know what other organizations you're applying to support this, or if you already have other support for that particular effort. So your program budget Like this is what we said we were going to ask for, 10,000 for operations, 40,000 for program, and 100,000 for capital. So then we would go through and say, the operations, that $10,000 will cover maybe a partial salary. It will cover some minor supplies and equipment, whatever else, rent, that kind of thing. And then the program, again, are things that would be like educational materials, maybe some staff to support education or training of some sort. And then the capital is the actual building. But they would want more detail than just these numbers. So again, if we look at our entire organization, you can see it's over $2 million. Um, we have so far only about $5,000 that we've collected to support our program, which is 150,000. So we certainly need more money. Again, private grants will state what their funding goals are. They meet with their board and they say, these are the programs that we would like to support. And they will put that generally on their website. So they have a goal of supporting education in the community or youth in the community. And then whatever your program is, you can identify this is how we meet those goals. Government grants, on the other hand, are requests for proposals, which is a little bit different. They have sat down and said, here's a program that we want to develop. So they already have outlined what the program is that they want. So it's up to you to then determine, can we put together this program in a way that would satisfy this request? So you don't have the option to define the program. The government defines the program. So that's quite a bit different than the private grants. So if you go to grants.gov and you come up with a proposal that seems interesting, that maybe our organization is eligible. So you go in, they say, okay, you have to be a school or a hospital or a 501c3. Well, I have a 501c3. Let me look and see what the program is. And then you read it. And the question is, can our organization accomplish the program that's described in the announcement? So is it going to be worth your effort? How much effort are you going to have to put to accomplish that program? Is it really aligned with what you're already doing so that meeting the requirements are not going to be a huge extension of what you're currently doing? Or is it like starting a whole new program? And if it is, are you able to commit to doing it? So again, we go back to you have the fiscal infrastructure. Now with government grants, they don't send you the money up front. What you do is spend the money and basically send them the receipts and draw down the money electronically. So they pay you after you've accomplished the work. So government grants are tough, especially the first application, So I often recommend starting with local or regional foundations. But with a government grant, so you have to think about how are you going to implement the project? And again, those measurements, how are you going to measure the quality and the impact of your work? What goals from the funding agency does the project fulfill? What are they trying to accomplish? And again, they're very clear about here's what our goals are. This is what we want as the program. Um, and then the other thing, of course, is can you meet the deadline? Some of these programs take quite a bit of effort to pull together. Um, and if you don't have a fairly long lag time, it might be hard to meet the deadline. Particularly for some of the government grants, but also some of the private grants, they want a letter of intent or a letter of inquiry. Um, with the private foundations, it's mostly a letter of inquiry, which kind of outlines, here's what our project is. And if they like it, they'll say you can submit an application. If they don't, they'll say, don't, we're not accepting applications like that. For the government, they want a letter of intent, which is basically to say we are going to apply to do this project. Our budget will amount to approximately X number of dollars. And the reason they do that is because they get lots of applications. They want to know how many applications they're going to get because they put together a committee to review the applications, which is a little bit different than most of the private grants. So again, if you have a business plan, many times you can cut and paste, especially things like the description of your organization, your past performance statistics, job descriptions, financial data, pretty easy to generate. So if you don't have these things, particularly a business plan, your score mentor can help you with that. So what goes into the federal applications? Again, they have goals and objectives that they outline as they're putting together their request for proposal. So you look at that. Are the goals and objectives aligned with what your organization is trying to accomplish? Um, what are you going to do to satisfy the need? How are you going to carry it out? What's the impact? And what resources do you have available? And what's the budget going to be? So the best thing to do is to sit down and outline the objectives of the grant from the announcement, and then talk with your board, your staff. How can we satisfy these objectives? Is this something that we can do? Who is going to be able to work on it? Who can put it together? So this should be the basis. Really, are your objectives aligned with the objectives that are stated in the grant proposal? So as an example, years ago, this is a grant that I applied for. And it was a program to support the access of low income or disadvantaged women to high quality screening for breast, cervical, and ovarian cancer, to assure early detection and treatment, and then to educate these individuals in prevention, treatment, and follow-up care. So at the time I was working at a hospital. So we said, this is something that we can do. We've got trained staff. We have certainly the ability to do this. So what are our objectives and our specific aims? So again, if you can relate each of your objectives to what's stated in the announcement, uh, it's a lot easier for the reviewers to approve the applications. I did a lot of grant reviews for the National Institutes of Health, and I can tell you that it made my job a lot easier when the organization said, here's where we align with your objectives. Here's what uh, here's how we're going to carry out that objective. So it may seem repetitive in a way, but here's how we stated it: to improve access to excellent screening, we're going to establish a mobile screening van, and it's going to visit areas where low income and disadvantaged women reside, because we know they have difficulty traveling. Um, we'll have all the equipment we need for the screening, and we're going to find out what's the greatest convenience for the local residents. You know, if they're working, maybe we have to be there available in the late afternoon or the evening or on the weekends. Or maybe we can announce we're going to be visiting this area on such and such a day. We'll be available all day. We invite you to participate. Um, so in order to raise awareness, we're going to we'll do newspaper ads, radio and TV, public service announcements. We're going to use social media, and we'll also just distribute flyers in the area that we're going to visit. So if we're going to go to a specific area, we'll tack up flyers in the grocery stores and other stores. We'll post them where but again, we're going to do social media, all these different things to make sure that people are aware where we're going to be, when we're going to be, and what's available. And I would point out that whoops, I do want to say for the education, of course, we want to do local workshops and seminars that will educate women in follow-up care. So we might post videos on YouTube, for instance, go into local community centers and do workshops, just to let people know about follow-up care, prevention, and so forth. So again, this kind of project, again, you can go and qualify maybe for a local or a regional grant because you have a description for a program. If it aligns with one of their objectives, then you already have an application and you can apply. But you could apply to both. You can apply to multiple granting organizations. If more than one gives you the grant, you can't accept money that overlaps, but a lot of times they give you less money than you actually need. So you could supplement that with at least part of another grant. So take advantage of having already written the application to apply to as many places that you can. So the big issue with the government is how are you going to do it? And this is going to be the bulk of your application because, again, the grant reviewer is looking to see how much do you know about this? You know, do you really have the skills to carry out putting together this project? So you want to sit down and say, what are the very specific tasks involved? Do we have staff to carry them out? or do we have to add staff? You want to demonstrate that you really understand how much work is involved. You want to, if this, like, for instance, I was working in a hospital. We had lots of nurses. We did imaging. We had lots of experienced people. So we hired somebody within the organization to head up the project, but then we have to replace that person. So that salary goes into the project. Of course, we need a mobile van. We need a lot of different things, but we need to know what do we need to carry out the project because we have to put it in the budget. And if it's not in the budget and we need it, we're going to run into trouble. So again, private applications generally don't require nearly as much detail because they don't care as much about the detail of your project because they don't know, they haven't designed your project. They're only wanting to know, does that project make sense? And does it meet our funding objectives? Where the government grant, they're saying, do these people know what they're doing? Are they actually going to be able to develop this program that we're asking for? And that's a big question. So the outline for either one should be the same, but the detail will be much greater for the government grant than for the private grant. So questions you might ask yourself for the project that I'm doing or that I did to screen, treat, and educate women. What are the equipments and materials? Do they need to be developed? If so, again, if we're doing education, we probably have to develop the content. Or we may have some things available that we can use for this project. Maybe they need to be tweaked a bit or something, but if we need to develop them from scratch, who's going to do that? You know, do they have, what skills do we need? What materials do they need? All those details. How am I going to recruit clients? We talked about using radio, TV, social media, flyers, all sorts of things. But those, again, there's a cost involved in that. So we need to identify what are the costs. That needs to go into the budget. So who's going to present the material? When are they going to do it? Does staff need to be trained? So again, do we have to recruit people? You want to be, what I used to do when I had a grant application in is to interview people that I need for the grant if we got the if we got the award. And I would interview people and hire them contingent on getting the funding. So there would be no lag time, or maybe a couple of weeks, where they gave notice for their previous position, but it would be close to the starting. If you wait until you actually get the grant and start recruiting people, sometimes it takes a few months and then you're already behind getting started. So you have to think about that sort of thing when you're doing a big project. So again, if there's training, where are you going to do the training? Do you have space and equipment? You might have to rent a space. So you have to know these things so you can put them in the budget. Then when will the project be complete? Can it be done in the time frame that the award period is? If not, how are you going to fund it to finish it? Um, maybe if you're almost done, you can apply for additional funding from the same agency. So again, we want to talk about then how do we measure success? That is so critical, and I just harp on that over and over again. Whenever you're starting a nonprofit or any business, at the very beginning, ask yourself, how are we going to measure our success? And set up the ability to do that tracking from the very beginning. So if you're, in this case, we're going to talk about an increase in screening numbers. So we need a mechanism for collecting that data. Increase in early detection versus late detection. So we need the data that shows what's been happening up to the time our project started for the neighborhoods that we're covering. And then we need to measure against that to show that we are actually making a difference. And then the other thing would be improvement in disease-free longevity. How can we improve the health of these people so they survive longer? So these are all things that, again, upfront, figure out how are we going to measure that we're successful. And just saying that you're serving a certain number of people doesn't really do it. You need some outcome measures. What's the impact? What's the result? What's the outcome? So again, it comes down proper budgeting. You've got to list all the people involved in the project. What are their time allocations? You might pull somebody from another job to spend 10% of their time on this project. But if so, that's got to go into the budget. If it's a multi-year project, you want to increase salary over the time period because that's what you normally do, and that's expected. If those people are doing what they normally do in their job, but doing it for this project, I use their job descriptions for the justification. You want to list all the equipment and supplies. Again, if you don't put it in, you won't get paid for it. So also list any costs for facilities. If you have to rent a space, if you have utility costs, those should definitely go into the budget. Is it necessary to travel? If it's by car, you might include mileage. If they're overnight, you've got to think about a per diem airfare. Um, Maintenance costs, if you have equipment for which you have a maintenance contract, you want to put that in. So again, you want to be very detailed about your budget to make sure that you cover everything that you're going to end up paying for that project. So for each budget item, you will have to provide a justification. So again, I said, use a job description. And here's kind of a mock-up. And I'm saying here, John Doe is going to be the project leader. He's going to procure all the necessary equipment and supplies, hire necessary personnel, determine the areas to be covered, and so forth. He will oversee the daily operation. His qualifications, he has an MBA and he has 15 years experience in managing a similar project in another city. Jane Smith, on the other hand, is going to manage the technicians and the other personnel who accomplish the van and monitor the work. And she's a nurse and has a background in breast cancer treatment, etc. So you want to do, again, try to justify every position and tell exactly what they're going to be doing, because that makes it, again, makes it really easy for the reviewer to say the budget makes sense. So should you hire a grant writer? They can, I mean, they can be an asset. They know how to write. And that's always good if you don't feel comfortable writing. Unfortunately, they may not know much about your organization, so you're going to have to spend some time orienting them to your organization. And also, they might be expensive, and the cost, you can't put that into your application. So, and remember, if you have somebody and you hire them to write a grant, you are still responsible for everything that's written in that grant. So you need to make sure that the person that you hire understands exactly what you're doing. They can make your story more compelling. Again, they're used to writing. They know maybe how to put in those emotional triggers that get people interested. They'll correct your grammar and your spelling, they'll check your budget figures, and they'll make sure that it conforms to whatever the requirements are for formatting and so forth. Do keep in mind that AI can often do the same job. And while there might be a initial upfront cost, there are a lot of free tools that you can use. So in-house written proposals can certainly be successful. Your staff knows the organization and they can call on colleagues to write parts of the application. They know the skill sets, so they know who can actually do the various parts of the project. Um, they know what you can measure for success. Um, the downside, of course, is it takes up time and effort of the staff. And if you don't have staff to do that and you have to do it yourself, then it is time consuming. So some hints to success: know who's going to be evaluating your application. If you apply for a government grant, the agencies actually publish the review committees, the names, contact information, everything. So you can go and look and see who's going to review my application. You can look up what's their background, whatever you want to do. So it's pretty clear, you know, if you are applying in an agency where you're familiar with people, you might actually know some of the reviewers. And then you might think, well, I know this person has this particular interest, so I want to make sure I address that in my application. Foundations may have a review committee. Sometimes they just use their board. Sometimes they have one or two people that are designated to review, depending on really how much money they give out. If they give out like grants of $1,000, it's probably one or two people who are reviewing the applications. Um, but you can check the websites and see how they may or may not let you know how they do their reviews. You can ask the program director, you know, who's going to review this or how is it going to be reviewed? They may or may not feel they can tell you. So, but you want to do, put yourself in the place of the reviewer. You know, what would you be looking for if you were reviewing the grant? Uh, Again, it's a lot easier for the reviewer to see that your proposal aligns with the goals of the agency, and they can rate it much better. So again, harp, harp. But I'm actually going to say that's one of the most important things. Again, you want to be realistic. Uh, again, one of the things that I found on reviewing grants is that some applicants really try to do too much. They don't really recognize the challenge in getting started, getting up to speed, and accomplishing all the things that they need to do to complete the application and complete the project. So you want to be sure that you don't try to do too much. A very logical description of your project, again, makes it easier for the reviewer. You want to be clear and concise. Don't use a lot of unnecessary jargon. Um, you know, if you say DNA may mean something to somebody and something different to somebody else. So if you use any kind of an acronym, spell it out the first time you use it so they know exactly what it means. Um, again, try to give enough background to help the reviewer understand about your organization. You want to edit it yourself, but also if you're writing the application, have others review it. You know, sometimes when you are involved in things, you think things are obvious that actually aren't. They make sense to you, but maybe they don't make sense to somebody who's outside the organization. So you want to have other people review it and give you feedback. Um, and then evaluate the proposal based on the review criteria. And I'll give you those in a few minutes. Um, most every application is online these days, but they still may have some specific format or something required. Make sure that you follow it. Again, if there's a page limit, you don't want to exceed it. Um, if budgets, determinations, all of these things that they require, make sure they're uploaded, because if it's not complete, they very easily could say, we're just not going to review it. So better to try to beat the deadline for submission than find at the last minute you forgot something or you don't like how something reads, and then you want to make changes at the last minute. So give yourself a deadline at least a month before the deadline. And actually, if you have to have it reviewed by somebody in your organization, you probably want to give it a couple of months. So again, if you have questions, contact a program director. These people are very helpful. You know, they'll often tell you, look, this really isn't something that we'd be interested in. It sounds like a great project, but it doesn't fit what we generally support. If they tell you that, then don't bother. Um, you want to be as accurate as possible. Again, you you can only do what you can do, what you have staff and skills and equipment to do. So you want to be accurate and correct. Um, if you're working with other organizations, again, try to get that letter of support because it does make a difference. And again, have it reviewed by other people. The way it works in general is a program announcement is developed. The agency specifies the objectives, the eligibility, the deadlines, when they're going to review, and when the award is going to be made. So they publish the announcement. They give you the deadline. They get the applications. They review them. They announce the awards, and then you get your funding. So time frame is extremely different between government grants and private grants. Government grants in general, going to be probably 10 months between the submission date and the announcement of awards. The rationale for that is they've got to get the review committee together. They assign various parts of the grant. Then they get all the reviewers together and review all the scoring. It takes days sometimes to reconcile the differences in scoring. And so it takes a lot of time. And again, the people that they choose to do grant reviews are usually people who are expert in the area that the application addresses. So these are usually busy people who can't drop everything just to review a grant. So they give them a period of a couple months to do the grant reviews. So that, again, 10 months is pretty standard. Private grants, on the other hand, sometimes you'll have to look at their website. Sometimes they'll review several times during the year. Some foundations will review small grants on a quarterly basis and larger grants on a biannual basis. But you generally get a response much faster than you will with a government grant. So these are the review criteria that are generally used for government grants, but many of the private grants use similar. So significance, is the project for addressing an important problem or significant barrier? A critical thing is the investigators that are doing the project. Do they have the appropriate education, training, and experience for the project? So when you're writing your justification, you want to make sure that you identify relevant experience and education of the people that are involved in the project. Okay, innovation. Is there anything new? Are you proposing anything new that might contribute to a change in how things are processed? Does the approach seem appropriate for the project? In other words, how are you attacking the project? What sort of team have you put together to deal with it and so forth? Environment, does the environment provide support? And again, I go back to the example of the mobile van. We're a hospital, so we have all of the support systems to support that project of the mobile van. So it's not something out of the blue. Um, if it were somebody who actually had no experience, it would be very difficult to put that together. So, final word, don't be discouraged. It is not unusual to have to apply 2 or 3 times in order to be successful. One of the positives of government grants is that they will generally give you the detailed feedback from the review committee. They will tell you why they didn't approve the grant, which means you can take those comments, revise your grant application, and resubmit it. I don't think in general private grants are that forthcoming. Again, part of it is because of the way they review things. But if you call the program director when you get a notice that says, we unfortunately couldn't support your grant, you can call them and ask, can you give me any feedback on why it wasn't accepted? And again, sometimes they will tell you. The Cleveland Foundation, for example, will give you some insight into why they didn't accept an application. So don't get discouraged, we say. You don't fail. It's just a first attempt in learning. And this is all, think of it as a learning experience. As you apply for various grants, start out small. The more you do, the more comfortable you will get with it, and the better it will be. You'll be surprised at how much fluency you will gain once you start applying for grants. So again, Candid has classes for people who want to learn how to write grants. Take advantage of those. A lot of those are free. If you're interested in doing it yourself, by all means, take advantage of all the opportunities that you have to get additional help. So I think that that is the last slide. So I am going to stop sharing and see if I can answer some of these questions. I apologize, there are so many today that I'm probably not going to be able to answer them all, but I will try. Again, you'll get slides and the link to the recording. So we did give you, the email address is david.holmes, HOLMES, @candid, CANDID.org. I know there are some questions in the chat. Candid is only for nonprofits and only private, not federal grants. I mean, anyone can use Candid, but it does only relate to nonprofit. For-profit grants, again, there are a lot of, again, that one link in there that says grants for women also has grants for-profit. A lot of them are for-profit. So that's worth exploring. The other thing you might think about is just using an AI tool to see if there are any organizations in your area that support for-profit grants or grants for for-profit organizations, and you'll get a list. QuickBooks is generally an acceptable financial tracking system as long as you set it up as a separate entity, because you want to be able to generate reports specifically on that grant and nothing else. Okay, again, there are so many good small business financial systems, a lot of them starting out free. Again, this is something, use AI, just identify, I'm a small business, these are the things that I'm tracking. I want to know what are the best choices, and it'll give you a list of different tracking systems that would fit your business. You can ask them to demo and see which ones work best for you. Again, if you're just starting out and you have a really small nonprofit, you can use Excel. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, as long as you keep everything separate and you keep all the details. So you would need to enter all your receipts. What's considered huge amounts of money? I would guess when you get into the 100,000s. It's really hard to show accomplishments when you're a startup and you haven't started operating. And that's really why it's hard to get funding, again, unless they're specifically saying we want to support a startup. because unless, the only thing is if you've been running a business that you have KPIs that you've been tracking, you can show that you've been successful in other businesses. At least that gives you some background. But yeah, you can't really show accomplishments when you haven't been in business. Um, Yes, if you go directly to the Candid website and sign up for their database, it's about $300 a month. But the whole idea is that they're set up for colleges, universities, libraries. If you find the library in your area, they will generally give you access free. So to register for the UEI, just go to the grants.gov site and you should find a link there. Can I speak about the 501c7? To be honest, not off the top of my head. I can look it up and give you some feedback on it, but to be honest, there are certainly a lot of different choices. The 501c3 is the most common one, but there's the 4 through 13. I mean, there are, I think, at least 13 different ones, and some of them are subtle, but I don't know right off the top of my head what C7 is. If grants won't fund startups, well, a lot of startups get their funding from using credit cards, donations from friends and family, venture capital. But it's really difficult. That's why it's such a challenge to start a business. Okay, for mission statement, background summary, and statement of need, how long should they be? Wow, business plan with appendix data is 98 pages. That's pretty impressive as far as the length is, but again, your mission statement should really say, we do this for these people and here's the benefit, basically, or here's what we do, here's what we do it for. This is how we do it, and this is what the outcome. And so it should be a few sentences. The background summary, again, should be a couple of paragraphs. The statement of need is really to talk about what's the issue that you are wanting to support. So I think maybe you want to meet with a SCORE mentor and talk about how to prepare an executive summary. Donor base outside of grants, can you speak a little on how to build that base? We do have, and it should be posted on our website in December, we did a webinar on funding your nonprofit. And I think if you go to our website, you should be able to find that. Does SCORE have a sample grant application? The whole problem is that every grant is going to be different. We are happy to help you with a grant application, but it's hard to actually give you, I could give you a sample of one that I've written, and actually the detail that I put in the webinar from the on the private grants is really what needs to be in the application. That was directly from one of the websites, the questions that they asked. I'm in the SCORE program. How do you sign my form that I attended the class? I don't know. Talisha, maybe send me an email and I'll work that out for you. Should you provide the grant amount you received from other organizations in the past? In general, they ask what other organizations are you applying for? And they want to know more, what's your current awards? Do you have current awards, not necessarily the past? Why would they need that information? Well, I think what they want to know is that you're not depending only on them for funding, that there's other options. And you're right, they may use that to choose not to fund you, but I doubt it. Is it good to call a private foundation before sending a grant? Absolutely. It's a good choice to call the program director and again, try to establish a little bit of a relationship. Get them to tell you, again, give them a little bit of information about your organization and say, is this the sort of thing that you are interested in funding? Um, you know, it's really tough to give you um, grant templates that were approved. Um, an example of SMART goals for writing grants. Yes, you should use SMART goals for any goals that you set, your business goals, your personal goals. That just simply means it's specific, it's manageable, it's appropriate for the time. I'm trying to remember exactly what those, but if you don't identify specifically what you're trying to accomplish, who's going to do it? What's the time frame? It's so important, and what resources you need. Um, you can't accomplish something if you don't set some very specific parameters. And yes, you will get the recording. Um, does this apply for education grants? It applies for any grants, yes. Um, what generally happens, and I know this on government grants, is that all the reviewers score the grant. So you may have 10 components in a grant and you score each section, and then you get a total score. Then you meet with all the other reviewers and you reconcile all the discrepancies. So you come up with a score for that grant. So ultimately, every application has a score, and they rank these according to the highest to lowest. And they take the pool of money they have and they fund from the top down until they run out of money. So you might have a good application, but they didn't have enough money to fund it because your score was too low. But a lot of times, again, if you go with what the reviewer has commented and you can amend your grant to address those issues and reapply, you might get a higher score and end up in the funding. So with the government grants, many run on a cycle. So they'll have a very similar grant every year, and so you can reapply. For private grants, I'm not so sure exactly how they fund. It might be just simply they like the project and so they fund it. If our budget exceeds the amount of the grant, does the committee look down on that? It depends on, see, they don't often tell you exactly. There are very few that will tell you exactly how much you can spend. Some of them do. If they have a limit, you don't want to go much over the limit because they'll say, they can't do the project if they don't get all the money they need, if they're not applying other places. And that's where maybe it's important to let them know that you're applying other places so that maybe you'll get partial funding from multiple granting organizations. Should you use direct research data with citations? You can, if you have pertinent information that strengthens your description, by all means, use it. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the chat. Let's start at the top here. Looks like we have people from all over. Again, you will receive the recording and a copy of the slides. So let's see if we find some actual questions. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday season, and that the weather isn't so awful in your area. We've had some snow and ice. Okay. Okay, I'm not really. Okay, the webinar is not just for nonprofits. The way to write your grant is the same, whether it's for profit or not profit. So again, Candid is only for nonprofits. But I do encourage you to use it. It just saves you so much time if you can go in there and look at what's available for you. So, okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So, let's see. There's Oh, here's a question. Do you recommend any particular fiscal sponsors, and what is a reasonable percentage for them to take? It depends on what your nonprofit is. Sometimes a church, I've had some organizations that work with a church that has a 501c3. Any 501c3 that is big enough to have a good financial system and also to have maybe something similar, they shouldn't be taking any reasonable percentage. A lot of grants will give you what they call an indirect cost of maybe 10%, and that would go to the fiscal sponsor. Ideally, you want to handle your own finances if you can do that. So it's important as you get started and you grow to develop good financial systems as early as possible. You do not need to put your email addresses in the chat. You will just automatically be sent the information from the grants or from the webinar. Yes, specific, SMART grants, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So again, when you set goals, make sure you have a way to measure your success. Make sure that you have the resources to attain your goal, and make sure you set a deadline. And Talisha, yes, I can do that. If you send a letter to my email, I can do that. If you're a for-profit and you provide training, do I recommend that you partner with a nonprofit to apply for grants? That just doesn't work. You'd have to apply for a grant that is specific for a for-profit. That's just how it works. So, okay, I think we are done. Thank you so much for attending. Wait, one more minute. With starting with an MVP prototype be useful in helping to meet some of the grant requirements? Maybe. I'm not sure. I would hope so, but I'm not sure. So, yes, it is David Holmes at candid.org. So, okay, so enjoy the rest of your day. I hope that it was helpful to you. You will get the slides, and we'll look forward to seeing you at another webinar. Now, I did do a funding your nonprofit in December. So if you didn't attend that and you want to review the webinar or the recording, it is on our website, which is score.org Cleveland. So feel